work, which is what's happened in the cases of many news organizations, or not many, but several news organizations this last year. So I would say the big difference that's happened this year or late last year was the hacking of networks and the infiltration of entire networks and by hackers who are allegedly based in China. Hacking of individual emails has been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, I echo everything that Ed says. I mean, to some extent, you're operating in China. There's a certain level of scrutiny, and there's no way you're going to get away from it. So, you can take all the necessary precautions you can think of. But again, it goes back to if you're doing everything in a straightforward way, you're not leaving yourself open to anything other than the fact that some people may know what you're actually trying to report on.
Yeah, and sometimes that scrutiny can turn into harassment. It could turn into police calls, home visits. I know of one correspondent whose 10-year-old son was visited by police when he was away. Have you had any such experience like this?
Luckily, I'm in Hong Kong, so I haven't, and Natasha as well. So unfortunately, our Chinese colleagues aren't here. Nothing like that you've described that I can talk about today.
But I think it was made public that one of your reporters in Beijing did get sort of threats, like physical threats. Is that right? I mean, it was out on Twitter.
There's two kinds of reaction. One is, there's the official reaction, which can be fairly, there's the top level official. Right. There's the people who implement that for the state, and then but there are also other communication channels which can be used. And you can interpret how strong those threats are accordingly. But I don't think that's particularly necessarily any different in China as to anywhere else. If you're writing about certain families, they may have connections who try to undermine maybe what your reporting is.
In terms of police visits, I don't recall any time this year or late last year when there was a huge step up in police visits to reporters, but there was, like, right around the time when there was this fears of this Jasmine revolution taking place in China, there was a 1 week period when almost every foreign reporter for a major news organization in Beijing got a visit or a call from their local police station, which is very surprising. It never happened. For many of these reporters, it never happened in their careers in Beijing before. People showed up at their doors, knocked on the doors, and said, "We need to sit down and talk with you." And they were just saying, "Oh, we want to make sure that you're not, like, contributing to some sort of public unrest or anything like that." So there was a real fear by the government at that time that Western journalism would help contribute to sort of like perhaps a 1989 style round of protests.
And the risks are even greater for Chinese nationals and Chinese news assistants doing investigative report inside China. I mean, as a foreign correspondent, you could be thrown out of China. Your Chinese news assistant can be thrown into jail, his or her family bullied, or worse. How do you protect your Chinese colleagues?
And it's happened to the times before, as you know, like we had an assistant who spent 3 years in jail. It's a very difficult question, and I know it's something that both our Beijing and Shanghai bureaus have thought about. Partly, it's if there's something very, very sensitive, you have to think about whether you want to work with this person on that. If it's a particular interview or if it's looking at a particular set of documents, do you want this person doing that? But I think in the investigative reporting you've seen recently, a lot of it is based on public documents. And in that case, there's a line of defense that you can use in terms of even if your researcher is translating the documents, then these documents are obtained in a very open manner, or they're obtained in a manner that anyone in the public can use, or they're taken off websites. So I think then you have there's a certain defensibility in a case like that.
Indeed. I mean, it's something we have a lot of talks about. It's something that does worry you. You're right, Chinese nationals are much more at the sharp end. The retribution can be much greater. So we, as an editor, my job would be to make sure that they don't do anything that would be seen not to be, or be, beyond the assistance that they're supposed to give. But, in terms, these were heavily documented stories we were talking about last year. So, that was pretty clearly, within the confines of an assistant's role. We wouldn't have them going out knocking on doors, trying to talk to anybody sensitive, any sensitive sources, because that would be, crossing a line. So it's very much up to us to make sure they're not in harm's way. But again, it's very fluid in China. You never know where the line is, and what kind of, how it will be perceived anyway. So all we can do is do the best we can to protect them.
I notice on the clock we have just 5 minutes until we open up our discussion to the audience here. So my last question to the three of you here before we open it up is just looking forward. What do you think is going to be the piece of great investigative journalism for 2013? What is the type of story that you would like to see your colleagues or your cohorts really dig into this year?
I want to know what you're writing first, Ed.
Well, I would say two things. One is I think we've already started seeing certain lines of reporting emerge, like you'll have noticed that the Times has written a lot on hacking, for example. But what's interesting is that Bloomberg was ahead of the curve on that, because I think last year Bloomberg had actually some very good long-form investigative stories on hacking. Then it became a much hotter issue starting this winter because for various reasons, including the fact that the Obama administration was making it into a top policy issue. But so you're seeing a lot of focus, not only from us, obviously, but from Bloomberg and from other organizations on sort of cyber activities by the Chinese. I don't know whether, how far people will carry that line of reporting in the next half year, but so far for the first half of this year, it's been a big line of reporting. Obviously, there are lots of economic stories to be done. I think that's especially at Bloomberg has excelled at. And then I would say that one thing that I would like to see more of in general is to see reporters get out of Beijing more, because I feel like with this last round of political, like last year, it was a heavy politics year, and it was and there was also this thing about chasing financial records. And I think that kept a lot of reporters in Beijing, and a lot of us focused on leadership and people based in Beijing. But it'd be good to sort of get back out into the provinces and find out what's going on a provincial level in China, because if the viability of the system depends a lot on what's going on outside of Beijing.
I would definitely agree with that. And last year, looking at so many things, we had so many leads that we would want to pursue, and that includes, I guess, the rise of power of officials across the country, and it's not just in Beijing or Shanghai. And I think that is definitely instrumental to have more stories of that to show everybody, tell the best China story that can be told. So.
There's only, I think, less than 700 foreign correspondents in China. So, there are so many untold stories. So hopefully we'll be surprised by some stuff that comes out. Like Ed, I agree. There's so many other issues. Wealth and power is one of them. But, there are a whole issues that affect people every day. Education, the environment. Ed has to live through the smog in Beijing, and that's been quite a big story in the first half of the year. And again, what's being done to actually address those problems now that there is a new government in place, I think will be, analysing how the new government lives up to its promises should be a priority.
Neil, you're the investigative editor at Bloomberg. You must have a file of stories that you want to see covered. For example, Bo Xilai, how is that going to continue later this year? What kind of questions do you want answered on that?
None really. To me, the Bo Xilai story is playing out. That's not something that my team would probably want to do. We looked at it at the time. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal did great stuff last year on Bo as well. There may be interesting twists and turns. There could be some unexpected developments. You read a whole lot of rumors about it, but I'm not really sure how accurate they are. I would prefer to move on to other kind of agenda areas than that one.
And what about the Chinese economic story? Creative accounting with GDP figures, etc.
We've done a fair bit. We did quite a lot on the US listed companies 2 or 3 years ago. June Lawrence, who worked on the wealth stories, who used to live in Beijing, she was instrumental in those stories. We have looked at leak economic statistics before. There is always something there, and I think if you actually highlight something, government sometimes will actually take heed of what's in the foreign media, and those messages will be addressed, those concerns. Economic story, it's changing. It's good, there may, we've written stories about the shadow banking that could again erupt, but it's there's nothing particularly there that I'd say that we're on the cusp of
obviously
breaking
you have a
something.
juicy story in the works, and you're not giving it up. You're not giving it up just
I'm
yet.
hiding the fact that I don't.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now's the perfect time to open up our discussion to the audience. All right. Question right in front here.
So my question is there a perception of foreign media have usually covered China in a negative way, or most of the story really deal with the negative and not the positive? And the second follow-up question is, do you think it's easier, aside from U.S. media, what other foreign media are being really aggressive in China coverage? What about AFP or medias in South Korea and Japan? And so what do you guys use in terms of, beyond the U.S. centric?
Well, in terms of, it's a question we get asked a lot. Is the U.S. Media coverage or Western media coverage of China, does it skew too much towards the negative? And I'd say that, my answer to that is always that the role of the media, it's hard for me to imagine sort of what's, how you balance negative stories versus positive stories, because the way I see the role of the media, I think the way a lot of journalists see it, is that it's sort of like a check on authority and power. So the role of the media is sometimes to portray sort of like everyday life, but with the power that the media has, and the reason why it's given this sort of protected by the Constitution, at least in the U.S., is that it is supposed to be the fourth estate. It's supposed to document how power is used, and I think that when you're doing that in other countries, then it might look like you're sort of writing bias stories against those countries, but in fact, you're exercising the authority and the responsibility that you have as a media organization. And when I was in Iraq, I and other Times reporters, we got heavily criticized by the Bush administration and by the U.S. military for our coverage of the Iraq War, and we got the exact same questions from right-wing Americans and from people with administrations. Oh, why aren't you covering the positive sides of the war? And the fact is that we weren't there to write about a school that soldiers had renovated. We were there to write about how the U.S. was exercising its power overall, the bigger picture in Iraq, and where that war was leading the nation.
I'll add to that and say I think so much of the work we do is about shining light in dark corners, and I think that really, for example, after our stories were published last year, we did get some reader feedback, a lot from Chinese people who came and said, thank you so much for doing this, because we didn't know about this, and it's important that we do. And I think that to me is what drives me to do this work and try to do the best we can for future stories.
Yeah, just finally, I think we're always accused of negativity anywhere in the world, as Ed highlighted. But I do think it's important to always take a balanced view and to make sure you're not overlooking some of the positives. When we wrote about wealth and power last year, you've got to remember that this wealth creation is in the context of, perhaps the biggest economic growth in the world ever. And,